Have you ever heard anything about the most violent robbery the Empire had ever seen in 1907? What if I told you that in 1907, a city was shaken to rubble in 30 seconds while its people were still praying? That the first color photos were taken, not in Paris, but in a Russian village, and they were hauntingly beautiful. That a mighty steel bridge collapsed mid-construction, sending 75 men plunging into the St. Lawrence, and no one saw it coming. And what if I told you all of these stories were nearly erased? In this episode, we uncover 10 buried events from 1907, each one almost forgotten, but still echoing into our world today. On January 14, 1907, Kingston was alive with afternoon routine. Markets bustling, children laughing, priests preparing evening mass. Then, the ground split with a roar. Buildings cracked like shells. The city screamed as one. In under a minute, 800 lives were lost. The city was unrecognizable, shattered like a porcelain plate. A Catholic cathedral collapsed mid-sermon, trapping dozens beneath its stone vaults. People searched the ruins by hand, digging for the living and the dead. The quake didn't just shatter Kingston's buildings, it shattered its spirit. But Kingston rose again, slowly, quietly, and scarred. That same year, across the ocean, another kind of movement was building, not destruction, but arrival.
Attention immigration officers. Passenger ship Kaiser Wilhelm II due to dock with over 1,800 aboard. Prepare Ellis Island for peak intake.
April 17, 1907. At sunrise, steam rose over New York Harbor as a wave of ships lined up for docking. The flood had begun. 12,000 people stepped onto Ellis Island that day, more than ever before. Every face carried a different story, and a single hope. They came from Italy, Ireland, Russia, Poland, Germany, some fleeing famine, others escaping war, all stepping into the unknown. Names were changed, identities blurred, but not all were welcomed. Those with illness, deformity, or missing documents were turned back. Some waited hours, others days, and for a few, it would be their last stop before deportation. Yet for most, the gates opened. They stepped into America, uncertain, exhausted, but finally, free. But while the world focused on migration and borders, something quiet and far more revolutionary was happening in the East.
June 10, 1907. The world sees its first full-color photographs from the Russian Empire.
In 1907, most people believed color photography was a fantasy, something for dreamers and painters. But in a quiet corner of the Russian Empire, a man named Sergei Prokudin-Gorsky had a different vision, and a 3-filter camera. Instead of taking one photo, he took 3, red, green, and blue. When combined, they revealed something never seen before. Peasant children in traditional dress, turquoise rooftops, glowing rivers. They weren't painted. They were captured. Close-up of a young girl's face in profile. Her eye catches a glint of sun, reflecting the photographer. What Prokudin-Gorsky created wasn't just color photography. It was time travel. Light from 1907, perfectly preserved. His work would vanish behind revolution and war, only to be rediscovered a century later, as if the past had waited for us. But not every story from Russia in 1907 was peaceful. Just 2 weeks later came the most violent robbery the Empire had ever seen.
Comrade, they struck at 10:30 sharp. Explosions in the square, pistols in broad daylight. The coach was overturned.
June 26, 1907. In the Georgian city of Tiflis, a bank coach rumbled toward Yerevan Square, just as it had every morning. But that morning, Lenin's underground army had a plan. Hidden in the crowd were bombs. At exactly 10:30 a.m., the silence shattered. Grenades flew through the air, exploding beside horses, guards, and innocent bystanders. The attack was timed to the second. Each man had a role: bombers, gunmen, and a boy with a smoke signal for retreat. In less than 5 minutes, they stole over 340,000 rubles. Dozens were dead. The gang vanished without a trace. The operation was led by a young revolutionary, known only as Koba. Years later, the world would know his real name, Joseph Stalin. That same summer, far from the smoke and chaos, a chemist scribbled a formula in peace. He didn't build bombs. He built the future.
July 18th, 1907. We believe we've succeeded in synthesizing a heat-resistant, moldable substance.
In a cramped Manhattan lab in July 1907, Leo Baekeland stared at a stubborn brown sludge and thought he'd failed again. For years, inventors had tried to make synthetic substitutes for ivory, shellac, and rubber. None could survive heat, until now. He called it Bakelite, the first fully synthetic plastic. It could be shaped, hardened, and made cheap. The world would never be the same. At first, no one noticed, but within a decade, Bakelite was in radios, jewelry, tools, even early phones. It was hailed as the material of 1,000 uses. But no one asked where those 1,000 uses would lead. Bakelite made the modern world possible, and plastic would shape everything that followed, for better and worse. But not all breakthroughs that year held the future together. Some came crashing down. Before we go to the next event, if you've made it this far, give us a like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us which moment from 1907 surprised you most.
We interrupt this program with breaking news. The Quebec Bridge has collapsed. Southspan fell during construction. Casualties believed to be severe. All telegraph lines are active. Updates will follow as they arrive.
On the morning of August 29, 1907, Canada's pride stretched across the St. Lawrence River, an engineering marvel they called the Quebec Bridge. It was to be the longest cantilever bridge in the world. So massive, its weight strained the very limits of steel. Warnings had been ignored for weeks. The southern span had started to bend, but no one believed it could actually fail. At 5:37 p.m., the bridge groaned, then snapped. In 15 seconds, 4,000 tons of steel dropped into the St. Lawrence. 75 men died, many of them Mohawk ironworkers from the Kanawake Nation, whose bodies were never recovered. The investigation revealed a fatal design flaw. It wasn't sabotage. It was arrogance. And 75 men paid the price. And as Canada mourned its loss, Europe signed a pact that would shape the next century. By the summer of 1907, Europe was restless. The old empires were watching each other too closely and trusting each other far too little. Germany had grown powerful, too powerful. Britain and France knew they needed something more than friendship. The solution was quiet, strategic, and signed in ink. Britain, France, and Russia aligned, not as friends, but as counterweights. They called it the Triple Entente. But it wasn't just a treaty. It was the opening note of a much larger storm. No one knew it yet, but this agreement would divide the world into two halves and lead millions toward war. All it took was 3 signatures, and from that moment on, the pieces of 1914 were locked into place. But while Europe tightened its alliances, one ancient mountain kingdom was preparing to crown its very first king.
Dispatch received. December 17th. Bhutan to crown its first monarch. Regional observers requested.
In the shadow of the Himalayas, a silent shift was taking place. Bhutan, isolated, peaceful, and fiercely traditional, was about to choose its first king. For centuries, Bhutan had no king, only monks and local lords. But the tides of empire were closing in. Their choice was clear: Ugyen Wangchuck, a noble respected for diplomacy, unity, and defiance of British control. On December 17, 1907, beneath ancient murals and chanting monks, he was crowned Dragon King, Bhutan's first monarch. Unlike his neighbors, Wangchuck chose quiet strength over conquest. His throne rested not on war, but on balance, and in a century of war, colonization, and upheaval. Bhutan did something rare. It held on to itself. But across the globe, not every people were heard. In the deserts of Chile, silence would come by rifle fire.
Dear Garcia, they told us to wait. We waited. Then they opened fire. I'm shocked.
In the northern deserts of Chile, saltpeter once built empires. But by 1907, it was building something else: anger. Thousands of workers, joined by their wives and children, marched on Iquique to demand fair wages and safer conditions. The governor promised negotiations if they waited at the Santa María school. So they waited, for days. Then, without warning, soldiers encircled the school and opened fire. No distinction was made. Men, women, children, hundreds were gunned down before the sun could set. The official death toll claimed a few dozen. Witnesses said it was over 2,000. That year ended in silence, for some, permanent. But even as bullets fell, other lives had just begun. He dreamed of engines that could outrun gravity, when most still feared airplanes. That dreamer, Sergei Korolev, came into the world on January 12, 1907, and decades later, he would send the first man into space. Before the camera ever rolled, a boy wandered the prairies of Iowa, chasing legends with a wooden horse. They called him John Wayne, and from May 26, 1907, he galloped into American myth. She sculpted in silence, black, Ojibwe, and defiant. By the time the world noticed, it was almost too late. Mary Edmonia Lewis laid down her chisel for the last time on September 17, 1907, but her work still breathes in stone. He gave shape to the invisible, mapping heat, electricity, and time itself. On December 17, 1907, the world lost Lord Kelvin, but the world he helped measure has never stopped moving. If you missed what happened in 1906, tap the card on screen now and see how last year laid the foundation for everything we've just lived through. If you enjoyed this journey through time, leave us a comment, give a like, and subscribe to the channel. We uncover the forgotten years, one Thursday at a time. Next week, we step into 1908, Part 1, from strange births and bold inventions to revolutions nobody saw coming. So until then, take care of your history, and it'll take care of you.